what's going on YouTube? This is Obsidian Anubis, and I'm back with another 9th Age Battle Report. Game 2 at the 3-day tournament over in Vancouver, Washington. March to War. It was a really fun game. Me and my opponent decided to drive down and play a few games, throw some dice around with some great people. And yeah, so my first game, if you haven't watched it, watch it now. Spoilers. But it ended up being a 20-0 victory for me against some Dark Elves, or excuse me, Dread Elves. So that shot me up to the front top tables. My opponent, who I was supposed to play, unfortunately got food poisoning, so he left. So I ended up playing the TO for my second game, which was against Ogre Cons. So Saurian Ancients versus Ogres. Alright, so my opponent dropped his entire army first. On the far right is, actually I take that back. I think it was counter thrust. So he took turns placing back and forth, and then my opponent dropped. Alright, so on the far right of this picture, my opponent has six, what are they called? Veterans? No. Mercenaries. 6 mercenaries with a BSB and general in that unit. Next to them is a giant. Next to them is a block of grotlings? Is that what they're called? The goblin-like creatures. Then on the left side of that building are 3 ogres with great weapons. And on the far left is a block of 8 ogres with hand weapon and the fist thing, Iron Fist, and a wizard master of pyromancy. This is after turn 1, so you can kind of see my opponent moved up pretty aggressively on the right side. So my plan going into this is I do not want to fight those what are they called? Mercenaries? Yeah, mercenaries. So my plan was to chaff up using my chameleons, and then my Thyroscetus, and then my skink hunters on that side, and just try to keep them out of combat for the rest of the army. That was my plan. We'll see how it works. On the left side, my opponent has a block of 8 iron guys with cannons, and then 3 more ogres with great weapons. So you can see I have my 3 Ramphadon riders who are going to get just about to get shot. I have 10 skink hunters. I have an engine with the Pterosaur with the engine of the ancients. Behind them, I have a block of 26 skink braves with my shaman adept of druidism on a palanquin. My big block of 30 Saurus warriors with piranha, and then my temple guard with my general who has the Pterosaurus vigor and the great weapon. So my opponent just kind of moved around. On the right side moved up much more aggressively. On the left side was much more cautious. Shot the cannoneers, guys with guns, at my Ramphadon riders, and actually only managed to put on 1 wound. Between long range, moving, well, actually I don't think I get a minus for moving, but between long range and my guys being hard target, he didn't roll so great and managed to only put 1 wound on my guys. So that brings us to Saurian Ancient turn 1. So I was kind of the opposite. I was aggressive on one side and very not aggressive on the other side. Oops, I think I skipped it. There we go. So this is the left side, so you can see I was very aggressive. I attempted to charge my Ramphadons into the 3 ogres with great weapons. They ended up fleeing, so I just kind of moved up after a failed charge. And then I just kind of moved up, as you can see here. On the right side, which you can't really see, it's just outside of this picture, I moved my chameleons up to basically chaff the mercenaries and able to shoot at the giant. So in shooting, I managed to put, I think, 5 wounds on the giant, so I only had 2 wounds or 1 wound left. Yeah, I did like all but 1 or 2 wounds. It was pretty good shooting. In Magic Phase, I got this really blurry card, which I think says 5 magic dice, which I think just gave me basically Oaken Throne and maybe a magic missile if I was lucky. So that brings us to Ogre Con turn 2. Yeah, okay, so my chameleons managed to put 6 wounds on the giant. So the giant charged the chameleons. They failed their terror test and ran away, and he chased them down and killed them. The mercenaries charged the skink hunters at the bottom of this picture. They fled, so he redirected into the Thyroscetus and unfortunately made that charge. They have the Swift Stride banner, so it actually was not as long as I thought it was going to be. And then on the left side, my opponent was very cautious. As you can see, he managed to rally his 3 guys that had fled last turn, and then basically kind of pivoted his gunmen around and to shoot at something. But other than that, was fairly cautious on this side of the board. In shooting, my opponent managed to wipe out my Ramphadons with the cannoneers. So much for them. And that brings us to Saurian Ancient turn 2. So in game 1, I had an extremely lucky charge with my Temple Guard into some Raptor Riders, and in this game, I had a very lucky charge with my Taurosaur and my Saurus Warriors into the front of the Cannoneers. Both of them, well, the Taurosaur was about like a 10-inch charge on Swift Stride. The Saurus Warriors were, I think, a 10-inch charge not on Swift Stride, so that was very lucky. My opponent killed my Thyroschetus last turn in one turn, so that really was not much chaff. So at this point, it was pretty inevitable that my Temple Guard were going to get charged by the mercenaries. So I tried my best just to kind of turn, keep the Nublars in my front, keep the mercenaries in my front, and then also keep them in the wood, should it matter. But it probably won't. However, in close combat over here on the left, I did really well. I ended up blowing through the Cannoneer guys. I think I went first because we were both in agility 2, but because I charged, I got the +1 agility. So I ended up going first, and I blew through, and I think I killed 4 or 5 before my opponent even got the swing. So that was really lucky. I decided to chase with my Taurosaur, which caught them and overran into the 3 ogres with the great weapons, which could cause me some problems if I can't kill them on the impact hits. And then the other Saurus Warriors just kind of turn to charge the mage in his bunker next turn, or take a charge if my opponent decides to charge me. So in Ogre Khan's turn 3, my opponent charged the mercenaries into my Temple Guard, so that's probably not going to go well, but we'll see. Temple Guard do have a lot of attacks, but my opponent will be going first, unfortunately. Surprisingly, my opponent decided not to charge the wizard and his unit of ogres into my Saurus Warriors. I thought it was surprising. I thought he would do it. Instead, I think he just kind of pivoted and moved back a few inches, trying to keep them farther away. Yeah, so this is kind of what the left side of the battlefield looks like. You can see my opponent brought the giant around to charge into my Temple Guard next turn, should they still be there. Which, this is the before picture, and this is the after picture. So, they are still there, and thankfully, because they have bodyguard, they did manage to pass the break test, but you can see I lost a lot of Temple Guard. I had 23 Temple Guard, and now have 3. So I lost 20 warriors in this fight, so that did not go well. I did manage to kill, it looks like, 2 mercenaries and put 2 wounds on the BSB, but yeah, that was definitely painful. So that brings us to Saurian Ancient turn 3. So I charged my Saurus Warriors into the front of my opponent's wizard and his ogre block. My Taurosaur managed to kill the ogres with the great weapons last turn on my opponent's turn, overrun, and then on this turn turned the face so he could get a charge off next turn. My skink hunters, the purple ones, came about to shoot at the giant because he only had 1 wound left, so hopefully I could get that last wound off. In Magic Phase, I got Flex Card 5, which was a great card. So I ended up regrowing, I think, 6 of my Temple Guard, and I managed to get a +1 to hit off on my Saurus Warriors, but my opponent dispelled their 4-up regen on my Temple Guard. In combat over here, I lost about 15 Saurus Warriors to my opponent between the wizard and his bunker. However, I did manage to kill enough that my opponent failed. He was outside his BSB and general's leadership and broke, and my Saurus Warriors caught him and ran him down. So that was actually, yeah, caught him and ran him down. This is actually before I chased, and then this picture is actually after I gave chase. You can see I've moved a bit. So that was pretty cool. You can see that the giant is also missing from this picture, as the big red star marking that my skinks did manage to take off that last wound. However, you can also see that my Temple Guard are also missing from this battle. So my general managed to kill off his BSB, but I lost the rest of my Temple Guard. My general was no longer stubborn because of his unit, and he broke. He did manage to get away by 1 inch, but my opponent's turn is next, so I will probably not be long for this world. So that brings us to Ogre Khan's turn 4. My opponent charged his general out of the unit after my general and caught and killed him. And then I think he kind of pivoted the mercenaries around. The 3 ogres with the great weapons, I think, just moved up to threaten my skinks. I can't remember if that was a failed charge or if they just moved there to maybe try to block them in so that the mercenaries could charge next turn and get a flank charge. Either way, that was all that we had left, so that brings us to Saurian Ancient turn 4. So I charged my skinks into those 3 ogres with great weapons. I figured with 3 ranks, having hatred and poison attacks, and my opponent not being heavily armored, that I could sneak enough wounds through that I could break my opponent and then maybe hit the Noblars or whatever they're called, Stontlings, next turn. I didn't want to get into a fight with those mercenaries. Those mercenaries would basically kill anything I had in this army. So I just moved my skink hunters up to shoot at them and kill as many of them through shooting as possible. In Magic Phase, I managed to get Flex Card 3, which I think I gave myself a +1 to hit on my skinks, and I don't remember if I got any of those spells off. I was in combat, so I probably didn't cast either of my magic missiles. So I either probably got a 4-up regen or a regrowth. So I did manage to kill or break the ogres with great weapons with my skinks. So I overran into the front of the Snotlings, Noblars, whatever they're called, which brought me out of line of sight of my opponent's mercenaries, which is great. I also managed to kill off a mercenary through shooting on this turn as well. All right, so that brings it to my opponent's turn, and actually, this is actually the last picture of the game. I kind of forgot to take some pictures, but I'll walk you through what happened. So you can see his general is in combat with my BSB. So his general started moving around, and I was afraid that he would get a charge into my Tower Sword and kill it. I don't think it's injured, but his general is pretty beefy, and I figured I'd rather lose a BSB than I would my Tower Sword. So I threw my BSB up there as chaff. My opponent did manage to kill him, but it actually took him 2 rounds, which I was surprised about. My skinks continued to harass the 3 mercenaries and actually managed to kill 1 more. So I brought them down so they were below a 4th, so I got half the points. The skinks managed to kill the Noblars or whatever goblin snotlings last turn and just broke and then overran so that they would get farther away from my opponent. And this is how the game ended. The secondary objective for this, by the way, was capture the flag. So my opponent had 1 unit left, I had 2 units left, so I won the secondary objective. So it became I think it was a 13-7 in my favor prior to the secondary objective, and then with the secondary objective, it became a 16-4. So a second Saurian victory, so it's 2 victories I've had now. So that gave me a total of 36 points for the tournament, which is not too shabby if I do say so myself. Yeah, so this game was really exciting. My opponent was fantastic. He was, like I said, the TO, so I'm really actually kind of glad that he did get to play because we had an odd number at the beginning, so he wasn't playing. And then he did manage to actually get a few games in, which was great. So I really enjoyed that. I have played OgreCons a few times, not in the recent 2.0 or hotfix. So that did give me somewhat of an advantage, I guess, for myself, is I kind of knew how ogres worked. This threw me to the top table again, while I was playing a Sylvan elf player who came up from California, which was great. However, I have never played Sylvan elves yet, so we will see how that game goes. It is always like and subscribe and keep gaming on.